It's 10 o'clock. Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards. Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals public review session for April 13, 2005. We'll begin with a special order calendar, decision items. Item number 1, 257, 2557 BZ, 221 18 Merrick Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, with this one, they submitted revised plans to show no doors opening from the building on the adjoining zoning lot onto the parking lot on the zoning lot in question, and added a note stating on the drawing stating that the zoning lot will not be enlarged. So I think this is ready to be voted on.
Yes, fine. Item number 2, 2602 BZ, 1680 Richmond Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay. With this one, they revised the plans to show perimeter and corner planting, as we would ask, and they provided a plan showing traffic circulation with the storage container in place, and they provided a plan showing the post-remediation removal of the storage container and relocation of the parking spaces, also as asked. They also provided information from the environmental engineer on the groundwater soil vapor extraction remediation equipment. So I think from my perspective, they answered all the questions. I would want to have this conditioned, because the plantings have not been installed yet, conditioned on the plantings being installed per plans and the storage container being removed at the completion of the remediation.
Item number 3, 4208 BZ, 182 Girard Street, Brooklyn.
I hope someone's here from the applicant's office.
Someone's here from Palatnik's office? Yeah, oh, there you are. Sorry,
yeah, okay, so listen hard to this one. In September, when the applicant first appeared here, so it was September 23rd where we actually closed the hearing, because this is just for an extension of time to complete construction. We actually said, oh, well, wait a minute, that approval was from 2008, and there was this intervening storm that put this site in floodplain. And so we said in September, this building doesn't comply with flood regulations, so you need to go back and redesign and come back to us and show us the new design. And instead of doing that, we received, not that long ago, I guess that was in late February, we received a copy of what was viewed as an interpretation or a determination from a plan examiner that said simply, resolved by plan examiner, permit issued 10/8/14. So we said, this is a very strange thing, because there's no explanation from the plan examiner about what was resolved and why. I haven't seen a determination that looks like that in a number of years. So we asked for kind of proof that the examiner had looked at the floodplain issues. In response to that, we received an email from the borough commissioner, or let's say through the applicant, that said something to the effect of, the examiner reviewed it, I don't know what more we can give you. And in response to that, we said that's not enough. And so finally, we get a copy of the objection sheet, though it doesn't show any sign-offs on each of the objection. And the objection sheet indicates that clearly this building is in a floodplain, that a cellar is not permitted to be below the level of grade, that all the mechanicals have to be lifted up, that this has to comply with Appendix G, etc. And so now I'm really confused what's going on. And then I remember that other interpretation that said permit issued. So I go online and I see that in July, a building permit was issued. How could a building permit be issued when you're here for an extension of time to complete under an elapsed permit? So I also go online and I see on the zoning diagram, ZD1, that what was approved is a building that doesn't look like the building that was approved here. It is lifted up 5 feet. It's therefore 5 feet higher than what was approved. So my first reaction is, incredible anger, because what, excuse me, is the applicant doing here? All of that time in September and going forward, it's misrepresented the facts to the board. And now, frankly, I don't know what to do, because the Department of Buildings has issued a permit, and the applicant has essentially come here and pretended that there are no issues when there are significant issues. The building is different than what was approved. So what are your plans? So we definitely can't decide on this. It's outrageous what happened here. Okay, any other comments on this?
There is a letter of substantial compliance signed by the BSA from February 2014. The additional plans were brought to the BSA, and the chair actually signed a letter of they submitted that.
They submitted that, so why were we asking about floodplain compliance?
I think they assumed that they were addressing that in the floodplain, in regards to floodplain compliance.
But then with a letter of substantial compliance, they have to have a set of drawings that are signed. So the question has got to be whether or not those drawings comport with the permitted drawings.
Well, these drawings are stamped approved February 2014 by the BSA.
But they have to be the same as the ones that
I don't say that they're not, completely clear. There are, to me, some questionable. What they just did is they basically raised the datum. They raised the base plane.
Well, they raised the building.
They didn't really change the drawings as far as I can see. They raised the base plane, and then it appears to me that they gave DOB a letter saying this is not a substantial improvement. They said the reconstruction is going to cost around $300,000, and it's less than 50% of the current market value of the building, which
that's questionable.
Exactly, that's questionable, but the DOB accepted it, and that's why they don't have to fill in the cellar. They just can't create additional cellar. That's the way DOB is interpreting this. And I think they got their permit based on the letter of substantial compliance from the BSA with new stamped plans from February 2014.
If you go on the virtual the BIS virtual file folder, there's no substantial compliance letter that's included in the virtual folder. They used the 2008 resolution as the submission. If they'd had a substantial compliance letter, they would have submitted that.
Well, I think part of the confusion
drawings
is that there was a submission from November of 2015, which was never made digitally by the applicant. And I questioned the planner last week, and there was a new submission that was added to SharePoint, which was actually dated November 2015, which includes this information.
So now I'm really confused, because we were asking, show us proof that this complies with flood regulations. And the response to that was,
don't worry about it, it does.
Essentially, don't worry about it, it does, and a note from a plan examiner, which is impossible to rely on because it doesn't refer to anything.
Right.
If they already had sign off on floodplain regulations, then why didn't we see it? There's something very fishy in Denmark here.
Well, I think part of it was that there was an oversight on the applicant's part that they didn't provide a digital submission in November. But it was submitted in a hand copy, like a couple of submissions, and actually the planner did have it, but it was not on SharePoint. Because what I was asking for was, well, show me the DOB approved plans. Show me, how this has changed to comply with the flood regulations.
But they did give us the approved, they gave us
right.
of DOB plans.
But if you look at the submission that was actually made in November, it also includes a letter of substantial compliance.
Yeah, but they're different plans than, they've submitted two different sets of plans.
Okay.
Right? So that's a problem. And probably the source of great confusion for everybody.
Could be, yes, I think so.
Let's just say applicant has a lot of explaining to do.
Yes.
Not okay to be doing this before the board. Not okay. So get your ducks in order. We're not going to have a decision on this. We need a full submission that explains what's going on. Yeah. Okay, let's move on.
Continued hearing items. Item number 4, 54556BZ, Williamsburg Road, the Bronx.
Okay, sorry. With this one, they submitted photos of the current conditions of the fencing and parking. They measured the curb cuts and observed that one was never changed to meet the BSA requirement of the 2003 grant, and they're requesting approval of it as is at 39 feet wide. What I wanted to know, as far as I could see, there is no drawings that showed it 39 feet wide, so I don't actually know which curb cut is wider, if it has an effect on adjoining curb cuts or on the corner condition or anything, so can't really review that question without site plan. Also should explain the reason for needing this wider curb cut. I just wanted to note also that there's a 3-foot planting strip and plant that they're showing on the drawings, and plants showing arbor vitae that are planned to be installed. It being a perfect planting time, they should be installed now. Right. And then submit photographs of the plants in place. Any other comments?
I think they also agreed to put in landscaping where the pole sign is at the corner. So
Yeah, so they did show it on the plans.
right, they should, yeah.
Yeah, on the corner, right? Right, okay.
Okay. Item number 5, 13193BZ, 3743 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn.
There was a request to adjourn this for 4 weeks.
Item number 6, 19502BZ, 2797 Linden Boulevard, Brooklyn.
Okay, they submitted mid-March a cut sheet of the menu board sound system showing that it is set to a maximum of 70 dBA during the day and 50 dBA at night. It kind of automatically adjusts down to 50 dBA. They provided copies of letters addressed to neighbors indicating that they advise the neighbors of this date, the date of this hearing, and that they are requesting operation 24/7. I don't think we got any responses from neighbors. I didn't see any. Maybe somebody else
But don't
did.
they still have to file for an amendment to change the hours of operation? That wasn't clear to me.
They do. That's
do.
part of the request.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the request. And so we asked them to notify neighbors because the neighbors are the most affected, obviously. So they provided proof that they notified the neighbors of their request, and I don't think we saw any responses.
No.
So if the neighbors are okay, I guess it's okay.
And we can-
I don't know if other people have opinions about that.
Did they, I know that they gave us information in the cut sheet on the amplification system, but did they say exactly the mechanism for that changeover from day to night? Does it say that it's like a photovoltaic cell or something that, or is it manual?
No, it's something, it's automatic.
It automatically resets it, it says.
Yeah.
So how does that happen? Is it by 6 PM it does that? Maybe they could just tell us at 6 PM it goes to, this
Okay.
particular decibel, or sundown, or whatever it happens to be, but that would close it.
Okay.
Item number 7, 31806BZ, 4905 Astoria Boulevard, Queens.
49. Okay. They provided a photo showing the container and the excess signs have been removed from the site. I just wanted to know now, what is the plan for storage? Is there a proposal for a permanent container? They provided DEC database spill reports to show no spills were listed for the site. They provided an affidavit from the owner stating only trucks awaiting service will be parked on the site. The planting as proposed on the plans, again, I note needs to be installed now, and the existing planting that is in poor condition must be replaced and do it now. There were photos in November, from November, that show fencing was replaced with new. However, there still seems to be, and we've mentioned this before, this wrought iron fence along one of the perimeters that's totally decayed. It's something out of a movie, actually. Decayed and collapsing, right? Looks like something out of a horror movie. And in the December hearing, the applicant stated it would be replaced. So we don't seem to have photos of it being replaced. We need to see that. They also need to provide updated photos of the entire site to show the location of the dumpster, that the planting and wrought iron fencing were installed, that the right turn sign on 49th Street was installed, which needs to be if it wasn't. And they also never responded to our questions about what is open and preventing them from obtaining a C of O. There are still 9 open ECB violations, so all the fines have to be paid, and any violation that doesn't have to do with the C of O needs to be cleared.
It looked like from the photos that we got on, I guess this latest submission, April 1st, that they put a wood fence on the side that was adjacent to the commercial that used to have that bad condition wrought iron fence.
There was a Slater submission?
However, the plans still say there's a wrought iron fence there,
Yeah.
but if you look, there's a wood fence on
That spot between the two commercial places? I thought that
yeah,
wood
and a
fence is-
corrugated fence on the neighbor's side, but on this side, they've replaced. Here, let's see if we could just rotate the view. Same adjacent. It
Oh,
looks
so
like they
that's-
put in a wood fence
Oh, I
there.
think that's at the rear, not at the side. The wrought iron fence is at the side that's facing adjoining the other
Oh, see,
retail space that's on the.
I thought this was the spot by the junkyard
So,
that had the
no,
messed
so the
up
junkyard
fence.
is one. There were several wrought iron fences, and they did
Okay.
remove one of them. Mm-hmm. But there's still this last.
There's another one
last
on
we
the
saw,
side.
Anyway.
And could they put actual parking spaces on the plan and number them? So that we know how many cars are actually intended.
Anything else?
Appeals calendar, item number 8, continued hearings, 278-13A, 121 Barrack Street, Manhattan. We have an adjournment till 5/19.
Yeah.
We only have a submission from the applicant at 4/14
Right.
that we're waiting for, and that's to be the last submission.
Right, so we should be getting the appellant's brief tomorrow.
Well, that's what the
if we're
schedule-
still on
yeah,
schedule.
yeah.
Okay.
Item number 9, 163-14A through 165-14A, Canal Street, Manhattan.
This is a really, really difficult application for me about allowing occupancy below the design or even the base flood elevation, so I'm really treading super carefully, and I'm looking at every single wording that the tenant is going to be signing onto, because the whole idea is that the tenant is going to be spending a huge amount of rent. So it means that they're going to have very serious possessions on this ground floor, like everybody's serious possessions. And so I want to make sure that the tenant, when they signs with really open eyes. So what they submitted was they provided data about elevations of the Sandy storm surge and prior high water incidents in the area that showed, other than Sandy, the first floors at 504 and 506 were higher than the surge. But 502 is very low, at 2.5 feet below the surge level of Sandy and 4.25 feet below design flood. So that's even more reason to be concerned about this application and to tread really carefully. The design flood and the actual first floor levels need to be clearly shown on the data that's provided to the tenant. And we have to assume that the tenant is educated enough to understand complex detail or can find out what it means. So don't hide behind a website for them to search it. Provide them with the information. The statement of facts was revised to show the terms of the conditional approval with 6-month plus 3-year intervals. I'd like to add to those conditions the requirement to show the operation of flood protection during any high water incidents and photos of the interiors of the units, plus statements from the tenants about performance where water levels exceeded the base flood. So the idea is there would be these intervals where they would be making a submission, but if after a high water incident there's flooding, I want to know that the flooding measures was successful. Otherwise, we're done with this. So that's, if it doesn't work, this is a bad idea. So the lease rider needs to be amended to show the actual base flood elevation in NAVD as shown on the firm 2013 map, and indicate that Appendix G requires the bottom of the first structural member to be located above the design flood elevation, which is 2 feet above base flood elevation. So in other words, the tenant has to really, really know what the rules are and how this does not comply with the rules. And to state clearly that the floor level of each of the buildings is X feet in NAVD, so is therefore X feet below base flood and XY feet below design flood. The idea is to inform clearly. In the rider, it states, because the leased property is located in such zone, the landlord is required to institute certain protections and measures and to inform tenant of same. That is not accurate. It should read instead that because the finished floor level of the first floor of the leased property is located below the base flood elevation, the number 8 of the rider with respect to insurance should read, in other words, the reason that the landlord is being required to institute these precautions is because the building is falling below that level. It's not just everybody in the neighborhood is subject to the same thing. Quite the contrary. There's special approval that was given, and it requires this. And then the number 8 of the rider that refers to insurance should read tenant's personal property. I forget, it has another term to it, but it seems to be kind of exclusive, and tenant's personal property is everything the tenant owns. On the EAP, what it stands for, but anyway. Emergency Action Plan, the language is unclear. Has the owner, I'd like to know whether the owner actually approved this language, because it's kind of messily written, and it seems to me if I were the owner of the property, I'd want my lawyer to look at it instead of have my architect draft it. So for example, there's a statement like this: the owner will proceed with the installation of floodgates and door and window flood shields around the front of the building. The individual floodgates will remain flat during installation. I don't know what those are. And will be sealed after the tenants and all personnel have left the buildings. Install the door and window flood barrier shields, or may allow owner's personnel to install them. I don't know what that means. Who's installing them? It has to be decided. It can't be everybody running around and saying he did it, because then that's when they don't get installed. We made that very clear in the last hearing. I really do suggest that the applicant has their lawyer review this language. I'd like to know who compensates the tenant for their inability to reoccupy the space, and who pays for the alternate living accommodations because the first floor has to be reconstructed. There's a note on the emergency flood measures that now says the floodgates will be stored off-site within 1 hour of it. Totally not acceptable. I can just imagine like we had with Sandy, there's like this mass migration and the traffic's all going the other way. You're gonna get guys who are keeping it in New Jersey or something like that to make it through that traffic. It's only an hour away. So it needs to be stored within the immediate area. I don't care if you have to rent the place, it's not whatever, it has to be stored within a short walk of the site. Then the other thing is I see there's It states that the shields will be stored in the water meter room. You have to indicate where the water meter room is. I see on the drawings, there's a little tiny room on it for the water meter and all the other equipment, and that's hard to imagine all those shields are going to fit in there. But anyway, it has to indicate clearly on the document what the location of the storage of the shields is. And there's a reference to something called an emergency response system. What's that? They also, and again, need to clarify who installs the shields. It's the same problem. The word BSA is used once in the document. No tenant's going to know what a BSA is. You need to define it, and you have to explain why the BSA is significant. The BSA granted special approval for these flood measures, and that the BSA has required these procedures be implemented. There's also no mention in the document that the installation has to be checked regularly by a licensed engineer. That must be indicated on the documents. And in the interests of fear about all of this, I'm concerned that once we grant approval with all of these protections in place, there won't be any, there'll still be inadequate notice to the tenant or future purchaser or whatever. So we're going to ask for a restrictive declaration that will be recorded against the property, and we need to see it recorded before we can grant on this, which shows the recording number. That number needs to appear on the certificate of occupancy, which will include the restrictions on use, the emergency action plan. Those are the things that are going to be recorded also. So it'll be a restrictive declaration with copies of the emergency action plan and flood procedures and all that stuff.
Copy of the BSA resolution?
Sorry?
The copy of the BSA resolution?
And the copy of the resolution. All of these things must be referred to in the lease, and a copy of the restrictive declaration attached to it. And our counsel will work with the applicant in getting the proper wording. With respect to the drawings, I noticed the top of the curb is 7 foot 7 inches in NAVD 88, and the design flood is 13 feet. The floodgates, unless I'm reading the drawings, are only 4 feet high. They need to be 5 foot 6 to 6 feet in order to be higher than design flood. The elevation's also kind of confusing. They show the bottom of the floodgates like floating 6 inches off the ground. An interesting phenomenon, since they're going to be actually sitting on the sidewalk. So those drawings need to be corrected, and the floodgates, you know, if they're heavier, if there's other kinds of structural adjustments that need to be made because there's been more moment, that needs to be corrected. Anybody else? I'm just very nervous about this.
Well, you made a statement earlier about the, if this plan is not deemed successful, that it would be a no-go going forward. I think that the BSA should define what we mean by successful, because we may mean something different from them. They may mean, okay, the floodgates are in place, and yes, water sloshed all over the first floor, but it was successful, we installed it. Whereas we may mean something different, so I think it's probably better if the BSA actually defines that, probably within the grant, so that everybody's clear.
Very good idea. Okay.
Let's see, I just had a few things to add to what you said. Regarding the first condition for a waiver, that, you know, the danger that materials and debris may be swept onto other lands, I think they should include that this area is beyond the limit of moderate wave action. But it's to their favor.
So where do they put that on the plan?
It's a sort of like a line with teeth on it.
Oh,
and if
okay.
you're seaward of that, you're in an area that could have moderate wave action, but they're landward of that, which is better.
Yeah.
Right. I'm still not clear how they're going to fill the 1 foot 7 inch gap between the flood shields and the front of the building. That wasn't clear to me. It wasn't shown on the plans. And the plans say they're going to install 4 foot high flood shields. The contract that they submitted shows 5 foot. So, you know, they should clarify what that is. The contract says they're going to have one crate. Somewhere in the submission, it says that one crate holds 70 linear feet of flood shields, but they need over 100 feet of flood shields, so I don't see why they only need one crate. And then when they have in their plans, they really are required to raise the first floor above the design flood elevation, but that's not what they're showing. You know, in their complying plans, they're just raising it to the base flood elevation. They have to raise it even more. They should modify their plans. And I think the restrictive deck is a good idea. Yeah.
It's a little, very much a pins and needles application.
But I think they've made tremendous progress.
No, absolutely.
They're very
Huge
responsive, and I think they've
Yeah.
made very good progress.
From where they started. This
Yes.
is
Yeah, where it was
major.
incredibly terrifying when they started. Okay. Okay. Anybody, any other comments?
No, I just needed them to include what you said in terms of an engineer's report, whether it's a TR1 or something goes to the building department, but there's got to be some reporting every year on how this system is working, and I guess they should do a yearly setup and take it down. And I think there is something, maybe I could be wrong, but I seemed in the back of my mind have a memory that in the flood regulations, there's something about how far away you can actually keep your materials. And I think the hour does not make it. It's got to be like within a certain radius.
Yeah.
Right?
But for me, an hour, I don't care if it's in the regulations or not. It's got to be
Absolutely,
walking
but
distance.
it's got to be, and people have to know where it is.
Yeah, this is New York City. It's not out there in the country where there's no traffic or I don't know what. Even an hour in the country, that would be really far away.
I recall from Sandy that they were shutting down the bridges.
Yes.
So I couldn't come to work because
Right.
I couldn't make it home because they were shutting the bridges, you know?
Right.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
Item number 10, 1615A, 233, 235 Water Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this one is the one where we think, we know that DOB has agreed that they're not subject to floodplain regulations, so not sure if we're completely done, they should withdraw, or we're still waiting.
Still waiting on Mr. LaBelle's office. Unfortunately, I do have an email from the Borough Commissioner, from Council copying the Borough Commissioner, saying the Borough Commissioner accepted the response and removed the objection. So I think the applicant just wants perfect comfort with the planning examiner level. I'm not sure. I haven't heard from Richard.
Not at all. Okay.
Yeah, we haven't heard from Richard.
Can we take it off the calendar?
Yeah,
Absolutely off the calendar.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Okay.
we'll hear from him tomorrow that he's willing to withdraw it.
Okay.
New cases, item 11, 21814A, 4603 88th Street, Brooklyn, Queens, sorry.
Okay, this was kind of a pleasure to read this application because it's like all the ducks were in a row when we got it. It was like the applicant actually did all of this work before coming here.
He's a
Isn't
former
that
BSA
nice?
commissioner.
He knows what he's doing.
I mean, wow, that's so great. And not only that, the applicant worked carefully with all of those other agencies, worked with fire department and DEP and DOT and said, we can make adjustments and all that stuff until everybody's happy. And here, BSA, we're done. So thank you very much. So I actually, I'm just appreciative, and I think it's a really great application. The only thing that I wanted to clarify, which we can do with a telephone call, is
Here.
DOT sent a letter that says they're fine with the site plan, but they didn't say, we're fine with the site plan dated 12/1/14. So we actually don't know if they have the same site plan as we have. So we just need to sort of.
They should, I emailed them.
No, but the letter is just,
Oh.
it just says, we reviewed the materials and we're okay with the revised site plan. And the only site plan that we have is from 12/1/14. So since DOT's letter is from February 6th, We don't know if there were any intervening plans.
There's another site plan.
So anyway,
All right,
we just need to
okay.
clarify that, and to the extent the applicant might just have something that they could show us, that would be great.
Also, the applicant, I think, is going to modify where the parking comes in.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, so he's going to mention that tomorrow to you.
okay.
Yeah,
But that
because
doesn't
he's afraid that
affect,
street might not be built, so we may, I think it's come in, head in on 88th Street.
but that's not going to affect the 20-foot drive that you've already agreed to.
That was my question about about the two curb cuts coming
Right,
from,
yeah.
and whether, could we resolve which one was going to be which? Okay, so that's fine.
And I wanted to know if they had a builder's pavement plan. That's
Right.
DOT requested that also.
Yeah, they requested that the pavement
And
plan.
I didn't see one.
Right, but do they normally give us a pavement plan now?
If he's got it, it would be helpful.
Yeah.
We can ask for it.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Item number 12, 32014A, 125 West 97th Street, Manhattan.
Okay. So this is the sort of for me, it's like the old story about open space and whether it needs to be accessible to the occupants of the zoning lot or to what extent. I just want to start off with, as a threshold matter, with respect to DOB. DOB requested in its December letter that BSA not consider this appeal since the appellants contested the ZD1 materials in August 2014, which was 8 months after the challenge period ended. The challenge period is 45 days. It states that the commissioner's November 14th ZRD2 response to the appellant, which went into detail and analyzed the question presented, was merely a reiteration of DOB's prior position. I don't find that a credible argument. DOB simply should have stated that the challenge period is expired and it ended its sentence there. By not doing so, they issued a fresh determination on the question, opening itself to challenge. It's not clear from the submissions, other submissions, that specific question had ever been presented before on this NB application. So as far as I see it, it's a challengeable determination. Moreover, worth noting that the appellants assert that their inquiry did not arise as a response to the ZD1 drawing. It seemed to be, and they seem to have found out about the ZD1 after the fact. You know, whether that's the case or not, I still think that there is a challengeable determination issued. The appellants assert that in 2011, when the zoning resolution was modified for the key terms changes, the definition of open space ratio changed somehow from applying to a building to applying to a zoning lot. However, the problem with this is that open space ratio only applies to a zoning lot and never applied to a building alone. So there couldn't have been, you just can't actually do the math. You can't even get your head around it if you apply it to a building. So since lot coverage of every building on the zoning lot has to be calculated to determine what's left over in open space. Key terms actually only clarified how you do it. It was sort of a mistake. I would like DOB and the owner to respond to a variety of questions. So the first is, why did both DOB and the owner appear to take a different view in their respective inquiry and determination in the, if key terms had no effect? So their inquiry and determination in 2012, which was a separate thing about whether you could whether you could sort of close off an area. If key terms had no effect on the DOB's position and BSA's decision in 2008. The owner's submission with respect to this is especially confusing, as it states several times that all of the open space on the Jewish home property would be accessible to all persons residing on the subject zoning lot. It seems like this was either very sloppily drafted letter, if this is not what was meant. That language is completely contrary to the 2008 BSA decision that concluded that allocation of open space to each building as if it were located on a separate zoning lot would be consistent with open space requirements. So I really like to hear from the owner better, or owner's representative, in better detail how it can be now distancing itself from that language that it wrote itself in that letter. And then I'd like to know why in 2008 did the DOB rely on the use of the word building in the open space ratio regulations of 23-142 as noted in the BSA resolution. It states in the resolution, the minimum required open space and open space ratio for any building on a zoning lot shall be. And then, so I'd like to know, then why is there no need to rely on the use of building in the phrase today? Again, the DOB seems to be saying there was no change, but meanwhile it argued that it could support its argument because the word any building on a zoning lot was there in 23-142. Then, I'd like to know, since 2008, how has DOB dealt with access to open space, especially for large zoning lot mergers? My biggest question is, if you actually needed to have access by every resident on the zoning lot, what do you do with these really, really large zoning lot mergers where there are tenement buildings and townhouses, and there's just no way you're getting access to those rear yards? So, and we know that there's many zoning lots that were merged like that, some of which are not subject to open space ratio requirements because they're, say, towers on a base or something like that, but you still have lot coverage issues to deal with. So has the tower cleared in all that lot coverage? And I think the answer to that is usually yes, because lot coverage is so different from open space ratio. And then the appellants did not provide us with any drawings at all to help us understand their claims about the accessibility of the open space. The only information we actually have is from the owner, which includes apportionment drawings from the owner for an earlier version of the zoning lots development. So we can actually see, and I've worked a lot with the architect who did the apportionment drawings, and I know exactly how he calculates how much open space allocates to each building, and it's quite typical when he does his analysis that he's allocating open space to the building, because there's restrictions on each building as part of the zoning lot development agreements, and everybody has to know, I get this much open space, you don't get to touch my open space, etc. So, but then I asked this sort of another general question. Since 808 Columbus, which is another building that was the subject, which is the building that was the subject of the original or the prior BSA decision, since 808 has already been built and a C of O already issued for that building, and since the zoning calculations for that project on that zoning lot were based on the 2008 BSA decision, hasn't the right of allocation effectively vested as to this zoning lot? So if not, wouldn't an alternative interpretation render 808 non-complying? It already has a C of O. It already built pursuant to all of that. So I'm even wondering kind of what are we doing here? Because I think they already vested the right to build under that determination. Anybody else?
No, I agree. I sort of had a question of exactly why would they be here if open space had already sort of been vested and building permits were approved and a building has been built. Where do where would you be if all of a sudden you then said, this the way that the open space has been calculated was incorrect, and therefore this entire building is non-compliant? And I didn't see where A, there would be any utility in saying that, but B, also where there would be real basis for it. I didn't understand that argument. It would be interesting to perhaps have some clarity on exactly what access really means. And does access, is it total physical access? Is it access in the sense that you have open space on a big super lots, you've got enough open space, and is that enjoyable open space, not necessarily, physical? I think Commissioner Otley Brown had made a remark to me today about where we sort of grew up in a similar kind of neighborhood, where, we had all of this open space, but you couldn't walk on that grass. And it was a super block. I grew up in Amalgamated. She grew up on the other side of the Bronx in a similar kind of a thing. But, that wasn't necessarily accessible in the sense of being able to walk around on it. But it was there for the enjoyment of all of the buildings. So I think that there needs to be maybe some clarity on that situation. Because to me, if you have the open space, you have the open space. You enjoy it. You can enjoy it 24/7 without necessarily touching it. So
Right.
that would be.
I actually think that was part of the discussion in the last go-around with 808 Columbus, which was what exactly is accessible. If the purpose of open space was to provide adequate light and air, do you need to be able to plant your blanket on it and lay on it for it to be accessible? Because you're still getting the benefit of not having a building there.
Right.
I just have to say that I've read all the papers and I agree with both parties, so I'm open to discussion.
Parties. Yeah, and it's funny, so there's 3 of us who grew up on super blocks. I also grew up on a super block, and there were areas where the children weren't allowed to go. So enjoyable to all, yeah, to my mother, but not to me. But the other question, and that's the other, I think, part of the point, I think in 1961, that was the time of superblock development. And there was this probably thinking towers in the park were the way that everyone was going to go. And so other than prohibiting the kids from going in places or walking on the grass because you know how hard grass is to grow, right? But it was an easier thing, and they didn't anticipate zoning lot mergers where you've got an entire city block made up of tenement buildings and all sorts of other things where you are not going on my land, I don't care what you do to me, right? And there's anyway no way to get there even if you could. I also would like the appellants to address another thing that was raised by DOB, which was why the prohibition against double counting in section 2314 does not make clear that open space can't be allocated. Does not make that can be allocated. Okay. Anybody else? No, that's it.
Zoning calendar, decision items. Item number 13, 17613BZ, 31 Bond Street, Manhattan.
Yeah, so this one, we have the C of A from LPC, and we have DEP sign off, but they had requirements for subslab depressurization system and air quality issues. All these requirements will become a part of the condition of approval. Okay. Anything else?
Item number 14, 3714BZ, 86-10 Roosevelt Avenue, Queens.
Okay. This one, though, we closed it. There was supposed to have been a submission made.
Change it to a legalization, right?
Yeah, well, I had a few things. One was a legalization, right. And my notes are, since this is a legalization, fire alarms and sprinklers should already have been installed. Right. Note should say existing. Ditto for sound attenuation. We need proof that these things were installed, like we've been asking for. With respect to sound attenuation, the drawing should show where the acoustical measures were taken and details. I think there are details, but it doesn't tell us where the details are taken. And then we asked them for a signage proposal. What? Sorry.
There's an issue with respect to this application, the district boundary line, the issue was on that. So the applicant's going to get back to us. I believe this is going to have to be adjourned.
Deferred?
Deferred, rather, because of
okay.
the district boundary issue. We haven't heard back from the applicant's office.
Okay.
So that's why they haven't given us the other information, because they're working on the district boundary issue.
Oops. Hate it when the applicant also doesn't check the zoning resolution.
Or even the map.
Or even the map.
Go to the map.
Okay.
May I go on?
Yeah.
Item number 15, 24214 BC, 212 East 57th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, they did submit revised plans showing the sound attenuation details and location and the sprinkler and fire alarm notes. They provided job numbers for sprinkler and smoke detection and fire alarm work. It would have been handy if you had provided us with a little biz printout, but happily I can go there and find it myself, but please in the future provide that. BIS verifies that these were signed off for the cellar and the first floor, so I'm okay.
I'm sorry, going back to 14, 3714, we're going to defer, do we want to reopen it also to talk about it? Or
Yeah, okay.
Reopen? I don't know. Do you want to, okay, so I just. make a
Okay,
note.
so for a motion to open 3714.
No, no, next week.
Oh, tomorrow, sorry. Yeah.
Tomorrow,
I forgot where we were, sorry.
So reopen it tomorrow? You should reopen it.
Comes soon enough.
Yeah, I
I
know.
just want to make a
Motion
notation.
is on the floor.
Removing motion.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't mean to confuse. Continued hearing items. Item number 16, 30-12 BZ, 14241 Roosevelt Avenue, Queens.
We were asked to adjourn this for 6 weeks.
Okay. Item number 17, 34312 BZ, 570 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
We were asked to adjourn this to May 19th.
Item number 18, 15513 BZ, 1782, 1784 East 28th Street, Brooklyn.
So actually, this is one that I've never heard. The last time it was heard was in August. So maybe you want to, Susan, you want to?
Sure. The applicant, as we know, this is sort of has a storied history. The applicant was successful in purchasing the adjacent house, and they changed their plans accordingly to accommodate more programming, including, I guess, additional men's sanctuary and a women's sanctuary, and an additional sort of all-purpose sort of sanctuary. They are requesting to maintain residential on the second floor of that, of the new portion of the new building that they just purchased for either the rabbi's use or they might rent it for additional income. So all the sanctuaries are now placed in the basement, so they don't feel that they need to have a two-story enlargement at the rear. So they will fall well within the 23 feet permitted for a rear enlargement. I think it's only going to be 10 feet high. And they say there are no new windows that will be facing the rear. I guess they're just going to have the windows that are currently existing. So they've given us new plans, and do you have any comments on those new plans?
Well, I think it's a better layout than what we had previously. But I was concerned about their keeping 3 dwelling units on the second floors of each of the 3 buildings, but they're removing all of the garages. So isn't there required parking for the residential use? And I think they're removing the parking. And since it's a residential neighborhood, I think they should have some front yard landscaping. There doesn't seem to be any proposed.
I agree that this is definitely a preferable proposal to the other one. There was a very contentious relationship between them and their adjacent next-door neighbor, and it was good that they were able to purchase that property. And so now that they're in a self-contained building, I feel a lot better about voting for this case. I do agree with Commissioner Montanez that there should be some landscaping added to the site because it is still going to be a huge building, even though it's not as high as it was.
I agree with both of you. I was glad to see, though, that they were able to resolve this because it really was a nuisance for the adjacent owner. And I totally agree there needs to be some sort of softening of the building and to blend in more with the residential neighborhood. So, otherwise, a lot better than before.
Item number 19, 24813 BZ, 1179 East 28th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, So this one is, other than including a small, kind of odd little rectangular area in the attic, a little sort of knob on the floor plan in the attic that is going to be included in the floor area. As far as I can tell, there were no other changes made to the drawings. So I'm not really getting the purpose of these submissions, and neither drawing nor the cover letter explain it. Prior submission also showed no discernible change. As far as I can tell, they didn't respond to Commissioner Montanez's request for front yard landscaping to be shown. In future, with everybody really, but especially here because it's so hard to understand what's going on, the changes to the drawings need to be bubbled or redlined and explained with cover letters. So I'm not really sure what we're doing. So I would like to hear from the applicant what was the purpose of that submission. Anybody else? No.
Item number 20, 30113 BC, 1502 Avenue N, Brooklyn.
Okay. Again, a pleasure to review, a very thorough and clear submission that responded to most of our comments, including a detailed description of the program requirements and furnished plans showing the program uses. The furnishings are really helpful in terms of just understanding how the building is going to be used. The plans were revised to set the third and fourth floor back from the street line, which reduces the apparent mass somewhat. The only other alternative, as far as I can tell, about massing would be to reduce the number of beds being provided, which would reduce the dormitory by one floor at 27 beds. As proposed, there are now 54 beds, not 64, as stated in the statement of facts. And as previously proposed, perhaps that reduction in depth had an effect on the room count, or there never was 64 beds. And there are 6 beds per room. You know, wow, that's a lot of roommates. Anyway, and I know there are dormitory regulations also about how many people can live together, so I'm hoping that this is complying with the building code requirements for dorms. Maybe the architects should take a look at that and make sure it's complying with multiple dwelling law and building code on dorms. Because there's also a requirement for a certain number of toilets and all that sort of stuff in a dormitory. There are letters from similar schools with dormitories provided, but I don't think those are comparable at all. Mirror Yeshiva has 321 students on a very large site adjacent to other institutions of similar scale. Torah Temima has 750 students in a large building on a large site adjacent to very large residential buildings. Yeshiva Novominsk similarly has 292 students and a much larger building on a large site as well. There is, however, a 6-story, with respect to this site, there is a 6-story residential building located diagonally across from the site on the corner. So if anything, in terms of neighborhood character, I'm not persuaded by these huge yeshivas elsewhere, but in terms of character, I can get there because there's a building on the corner that's essentially the same massing as this one. So given some other cases that have been before us and some issues about construction issues and construction safety, I'm concerned about whether this 2-story structure can actually handle 3 more stories without significant rebuilding. I'd like to hear from the applicant's architect about what is being planned for the engineering of this small structure, and to make sure also that it's meeting all the fire and egress requirements. Yes.
I had asked if they had some sort of a document that would show what the average room sizes were for the similar uses of both the classrooms and the dormitory rooms, and they did put the space per person on the plans, which I found very helpful, but it's still, for me, at least for the dorm rooms, is not grounded in any standard, official standard, so it'd be helpful if they gave that. And then I looked at the room occupancy schedule for the classrooms, and it looked as if the classrooms are empty for most of the day. It seems like they're only occupied for 3 hours per day per classroom. And so I was wondering, why did they need the 5 classrooms? Because that's an entire floor.
That's right. Is that a mistake? Is that what?
No, I read it exactly the same way. It appeared that there were hours in which certain classrooms just didn't have anybody in them. So I was wondering, one of my questions was, if that's the case, then they need to sort of justify why they need that room and perhaps walk us through a little more in detail what the day looks like. You know, is it because all those kids are, young adults are now in, you know, in one of the larger rooms, and so therefore a couple of the classrooms are empty because all those people are someplace else? It wasn't really clear. It looked like
All 5 classrooms are empty at the exact same times. And
Oh, because
that
they're
is-
all going down to the Beit Midrash or something like that. at
Right,
the same
and so what ends up happening is for literally for 3 hours a day, those 5 classrooms are in use. And I was wondering if there was any way they could somehow stagger their program so that they can
Right.
make do with less than the 5
they
classrooms.
may not need those 5 classrooms.
Well, I just felt that the applicant didn't look at the revised plans. And, for example, they've reduced the FAR to 4.18, which is not really, you know, not noted in the statement. The statement says they're providing 6 parking spaces, but there's only 1 on the plans. It says that they're providing no bicycle parking, but on the plans it shows 9 bicycle spaces. And then again, the 64 beds and only 54 are on the plans. So, and also, I would like just a little information if they were still in the R6 district, how many of these waivers would be required? Because I guess part of their problem is the downzoning.
Right. Okay. Great, thank you.
Item number 21, 74TBC, 600 McDonald Avenue, Brooklyn.
This one, they asked to adjourn till 5:19. But I'm curious about this. This was taken off the calendar in October. So if they're adjourning now, having been put back on the calendar, it sounds like they're still not ready. So I think we should just keep this off the calendar until they actually make a submission, instead of, you know, adding more adjournments to this list, because they've already adjourned many times.
Item number 22, 3114BZ, 165 Spencer Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, with this one, they made a programmatic needs study, which I found to be pretty clear. It does need to be clearer, though, about how many people in admin and staff offices and how many children at each grade level. The children, I could kind of do the math myself, but they didn't say it. But it seems like there are a lot of offices, and I don't really understand how offices and teachers work these days. Does every teacher need an office? Like, how does that work? I did hear in another interview or another discussion about another school that there's an increasing need for sort of therapy classes and things like that. Maybe that's what this is, you know, I don't know, but they didn't explain why there's so many little offices all over. The program requirements, though, were clear about how the layout, and it was understood about how many, generally clear, but how are the sizes of the lunchroom and the auditorium gym determined? You know, that doesn't necessarily, the lunchroom and many of the offices are in the cellar, so, and that space seems to be used very efficiently, and obviously there's not too many things you can put in the cellar, so it's less, say, important to justify those in terms of the effect on the massing, but we do need that. The program also refers to a play yard, but I didn't see where there's room for a play yard. And is the roof proposed to be used for play? With respect to the 1214 land use and traffic report, but that was submitted in March, The study demonstrates that there are residential and community facility uses in the immediate area across the street from and adjacent to the site. With respect to traffic, all the students will be picked up and dropped off by bus, and the schedule is 5 buses arriving in 15-minute intervals during each drop-off and pickup period. And the way that was described in the statement of facts, I found very clear and believable, so that it's not going to be have an impact on surrounding uses, and it seems like the children will be carefully handled to bring them in and out quickly. DEP has reviewed the hazmat report, and on January 20th, they agreed to the Phase 2 work plan. DEP is currently reviewing the air quality and noise, which unfortunately were not submitted until March 10th, even though they were completed much earlier. So a lot of time was lost there. The text should be corrected in the noise analysis summary in both what was submitted by Equity Environmental and in the statement of findings. It states that there will be adverse impacts related to noise, so always be careful that the word "not" shows up when it's really, really needed. Okay. Anybody else?
I just had one question. Can they clarify their A finding regarding the site search? Because it looks like they had a site search to accommodate K through 12 and 800 students, and actually it's only K through 8 and 500 students.
Oh.
Item number, I'm sorry, you may go on?
Yeah.
Item number 23, 9814BZ, 404 Richmond Terrace, Staten Island.
Okay, that one they asked to adjourn also.
Item number 24, 12714BZ, 3241 101st Street, Queens.
And also requested adjournment.
Item number 25, 14614BZ, 285 Grand Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this is that, I believe that CrossFit gym.
Yep.
Sorry, yeah, CrossFit. They submitted plans showing the existing and the proposed sprinkler and emergency egress lighting, signage, smoke detectors, and fire alarm systems. They also submitted paperwork showing that the fire department approved the sprinklers and fire alarm systems that were installed, and that was signed off. They submitted a letter from the engineer, another one, about 95-pound weights being contemporaneously dropped by 5 patrons and stating that it won't destabilize the structure. Excuse me if I'm a little skeptical. It states also that rubber mats are provided on the floor. I work very often with a historic preservation architect who talks about little motions that are kind of relatively slight in old buildings that when repeated have an effect of destabilizing the structure. So this isn't a little bit of a motion, but anyway, so as a result, I would like to limit this one because these CrossFits, which are really a nuisance, you know, or are turning out to be a nuisance. I'd like to really limit this to a term of 2 years pending review of the complaints. And that the weight drops, all of them, whatever they call a drop, that means not putting the weight down on the ground with your fingers. So even if it's dropped from your ankle, that is going to be limited to use exclusively on drop platforms that are created for the purpose criterion their engineer has already created for the other project we've been looking at. And so these guys need to create those drop platforms. Anybody else?
Item number 26, 16914BZ, 325 Avenue Y, Brooklyn.
Okay, we're going to adjourn this one as well. I don't believe it. Okay. All right. With this one, they provided deeds showing common ownership of the parking lot and the subject site. However, lot 4366 lot 1, which is the parking lot site, doesn't show up on Buildings Department website, so there's no C of O found anywhere, and there's no restriction on its use indicated on ACRIS of any kind.
Are you speaking about MUI?
Sorry.
Pennsylvania Avenue.
Pennsylvania.
We finished with Avenue Y.
I didn't call the other one. I thought you were still speaking about MUI. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
I thought
item
you called
27, 23214 BZ, which is 946 Pennsylvania Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, I'll
Sorry
start
about
over.
that, people.
I'll start over, I'm sorry. So with this one, they provide a deed showing the common ownership of the parking lot and the subject site, but with respect to the parking lot site, it doesn't show up on BIS, so there's no C of O that I can find. There's no restriction on its use that's indicated in ACRIS, so it needs to be restricted to parking. So to speed this up, because this really isn't, this is about PCE, right? But still, here you come to us, it's a BSA, it's in the BSA world already, so we need to clear things up. I would like to have the owner amend the C of O and record a restrictive declaration on the property with respect to the use. That'll clean things up. Now we know the PCE actually has a place to park, and that the building is complying with the original BSA grant. And Mr. Skaduda will be happy because it reminds him of his childhood.
Well, also, I'd just like to note that the parking lot, about 2/3 of the parking lot is currently being used for bus parking. So
Oh.
I'm not sure how they're fitting the 150 vehicles required for the other buildings. So.
Yeah, they should show the amount of parking they actually need and physically show that they have it.
Okay, so.
But it is just a PCE. So.
Yeah, but-
Right, but
But they're supposed to
that's
have
what
the
happened,
money.
yeah.
Life goes on.
Item number 28, 28914 BZ, 2232, 36 31st Street, Queens. Say those numbers.
1 second. Okay. Queens. So they revised the statement of facts and submitted photos of the wall facing the neighbors, now painted and cleaned of all that extraneous wiring and strange lighting. They removed the overhead lighting. They also submitted letters from the neighbors. That was good, showing no noise complaints. They clarified the dimensions on the plans, though I do have to say the site plan still has illegible text on it. And since that's probably going to be what's included with the approval set that goes to DOB, you need to have all the text legible. So it's effective, lots of multiple scans. So the text, either take it off and rewrite it or clarify it, make it clear. They did obtain also estimates on work by a landscaper who explained about the difficulty of planting along that exterior wall. And they provided photos of some installed planting in boxes behind the wall. I don't know, again, the survivability of an above-grade box. I would have thought that you need to submerge it. Anyway, I don't know how people feel about that because they went ahead and did it without us seeing it, knowing we didn't want planters. So, listening to others.
Well, I don't know enough about how one plans to really make a statement about whether the boxes are going to survive. My instinct tells me that you'd prefer to have it in the ground. But maybe, if this is not a long term, we can come back and revisit to see whether these things are still alive after a short period of time. I don't know. I don't know what they really put in there that would last that long. Maybe it's a seasonal display. Maybe that's easier. If they need boxes, then maybe it's something that they can do seasonally. That something for winter time, then spring comes and they plant it with some nice flowers or something like that. I don't know, but that's easier than trying to get something to survive. or ivy ground. There's always that good ground cover stuff. So
I don't want them to have to come back because of planting. That's a lot.
It's true.
But anyway,
Well, I just think, they have a better survivability if they're in the ground because they just have a tendency to freeze when they're above ground, but then they should be required to replace them
right.
next year. And I would just like to provide them to provide photos of all the completed landscaping, including the interior portion.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Fire division, maintain, okay. Single?
New cases, item number 1, 2914BZ, 255 East 27th Street, Brooklyn.
So this is actually a legalization and a request to add even more floor area in addition to the legalization. There's a lot of kind of misrepresentations kind of on the drawings or in the statement. The legal rear yard is described as being 21 foot 11. But that's obviously not the legal rear yard, that was 30 feet. So it's not an existing condition. They need to be clear in the drawings that the request, both in the drawings and in the special permit, that the request is to legalize work done in the rear yard without permits. The one-story appendage in the rear is not pre-61, given the difference in brickwork from the main house. It's obviously built quite recently because the main house looks like it was built recently. So the 1950 Sanborn does not show the appendage, and in fact, it shows a one-story corner of the main two-story house kind of removed. So the 1992 DOB-approved drawings show a 30-foot rear yard. So in the first place, the application has to be clear about what is legal, what is as-built, and then what is being requested. So we'll need the drawings of the 1992 permitted structure, the as-built conditions, and the total request. A legalization set, when it's filed with the DOB, always shows the entire unpermitted area as if new construction. It looks like this house was actually built 10 feet longer than what was permitted in 1992. So, at least. But there's no way to tell that from the drawings, it's just me doing the math. So again, I view that as a misrepresentation of the facts. And we have to clean up these misrepresentations. The proposal even includes a 6-foot greenhouse, which I've now seen on 2 applications, so this is a new little thing that's going on. So a 6-foot greenhouse that would reduce the proposed 20-foot rear yard to 14 feet. So in the real world, where you have a required yard of 30 feet, a 6-foot greenhouse, if it's actually a greenhouse, is a permitted obstruction, right, in the rear yard. However, the 20-foot rear yard is not a legal rear yard. You're requesting permission to obstruct the required rear yard. You can't now go and say, oh, we're going to obstruct the obstructed rear yard. So just take those greenhouses right off, because that's not the deal. And we're going to make that clear in the materials, in the resolution. So I'm not, this was, if I've got this one still right, this was also kind of a confusing application because given that the applicant's been here before, I didn't understand why there was absolutely no case at all, of no submission of any kind in support of the enlargement being in concert with neighborhood character, with the rear yard issues. There are no rear yard studies, no photos, no streetscapes. I don't understand how this got here. So, you know, go back and do it right.
Anybody else? Oh, I found it really very incomplete, and I have to say I was annoyed because it made me so confused. And, you know, my big bugaboo is show me what, you know, the legal condition should be, then show me what, you know, portion is illegal, and then show me what you want to do with the whole kit and caboodle.
Right.
So it's sort of like 3 stages, just walk me through each stage. And it was so hard for me to figure out exactly which portions of this house, you know, were illegal and where he was really, you know, sort of taking his legality from to build more. So that I'm just registering my annoyance generally about that, because it's not the first time we've seen this, and it just make it so much easier if you just tell us what would be legal, what was built illegally, and then where we're going from there. It's okay to tell the truth.
Well, not only is it okay, it's required to tell the truth, and I'm getting to the point. where all the applicants should know that at this point, I'm starting to think of these as willful concealment of information, and that is not okay. Because we know how this is done. We've been at this for a long time. We know how this is done. Anybody else?
I just wanted to note that, well, the survey shows an 8-foot, 6.5-inch side yard on the north side, but all the plans use 8-foot 3 inches, which I don't understand. And besides the illegal rear addition, I think in the front, the second story was possibly an illegal intrusion into the non-complying front yard also, so.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then you might ask.
It would be nice to know what the original house was.
Right.
Exactly, exactly, just show us.
Well, we don't know the original house, we have the 92 drawings. But then you have to sit there and do it yourself. Oh, look, there's no little bump over here on the left. So let me see if there's a bump over here on the other drawing.
Well, in the 92 drawings, it does show that they have a second floor addition, but I don't know how they could do that if they're encroaching into the front yard. Maybe there was a different zoning or something, I don't know.
Yeah, you have to show that there had to have been some pre-existing noncompliance in that front yard, because it's a totally different,
Yeah.
and it's not apples to apples the way that it's dimensioned either. You have to kind of figure out what those dimensions are to see if you come up with the 16 feet.
Right, and if you look at the other homes on the block, it looks like the second floor sets back.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So it took like a half an hour to do the math, and I got tired.
Yeah, well, but it's, I have to say, it's the job of the applicant to do all this work. It's not our job to do this. And it's the job of the applicant, because by the way, you're effectively calling the BSA's attention to illegal work. Be careful what you call attention to, because there's no obligation to approve either the legalization or the requested addition, right? So that rear yard incursion that should not be there, maybe it has to come down. Right? So, don't just take these jobs and say, okay, we're doing it because it's yet again another one of these projects. Look at what you've got. Look at the conditions. Tell the client, look, you've got a lot of illegal things here and we can't guarantee that you're going to be able to keep them. Okay.
Next one. 18214BZ, 1977 Homecrest Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. So this is sort of like a technical conversation that I wanted to just have about this. So one of the requirements of the side yards, it's another one of these 73-622s, one of the requirements of the side yards is that in addition to having a 5-foot minimum, the total is 13 feet. So we see a lot where they have something that's more than 8 feet on one side, and they have an existing non-compliant condition on the other, like something really small. And so they say, well, we're going to continue to something really small, let's say a 2-foot side yard. But we have 9 feet on the other side, or 10 feet on the other side. We're going to reduce that down to 9 feet, or 8 feet. So I don't get it. So now it's an existing non-compliant condition where the combined side yards are less than 13 feet, or maybe they are just 13 feet. In this case, it would be, depends on your point of view, it would be 11 feet, right? So how could you then be allowed under this special permit to reduce the side yard, the total of 13 feet, to less? That's another requirement of the side yard regulations. So I thought that all you're allowed to do is maintain the existing non-complying side yard condition and extend it horizontally or vertically. So my first is, how can they reduce the side yard to 10 feet when the existing is, whatever? 9'3", yeah. Right. They want to reduce it to 8 feet and the existing is 9'3". I don't even understand how we have the authority to do that. That's the first.
Well, on the other side, they have a 2-foot 1-inch side yard, but it's only for like 6 feet. And then they want to extend that all the way back.
Right.
And I didn't, I don't think they've proved that was there, and I question why can't they just provide the 5 feet?
Right.
Because it's only for a very short part of the house.
I totally agree with that. So they can prove it was there since the 30s because they show a Sanborn map that actually has an unusual number of that exact same really weird condition. And I was actually talking to a friend who's a historian to see what in the world were those things. So what I think they were probably built as first a little extension porch in the 1920s, and then a little tool shed or something like that. And then everybody sort of blended the tool shed, or maybe it was even a shower. I mean, I remember as a little kid, we would go to outdoor showers at the bungalows. So maybe it was something like that. So is that something that you should be allowed to count as a side yard? Because you've got a really nice side yard going all the way back. So I agree. I don't see why we should allow this to be reduced to 2 feet when there's plenty of room to have 5 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's one. Then this is another one that proposes a greenhouse to reduce even further the 20-foot rear yard. They're not increasing the height of the existing house, so thankfully we don't need to look at the mass with respect to the streetscape. It's just the horizontal and vertical mass being increased along the side yards and the rear. The photos of the rear yard and the rear yard study show that the adjoining rear yards are a minimum of 27 feet deep. One neighbor has a 1-story, or maybe it's a 2-story garage, because the materials provided by Urban Cartographics don't tell you how tall those garages are, and most of the time they're 1-story. Then there's this photograph with trees and no labeling of any kind, and then there's a statement that actually somebody somewhere has a 2-story garage, which is probably illegal, by the way, because it's got residence above, and last I looked, you're not allowed to have 2 residences on a little lot like this, unless it really predates a lot of dates. I don't know how far back buildings were allowed, like 1898? Anyway, so that's a whole other subject. So that needs to be clarified. Anybody else?
I had a question about their proposed FAR. Their underlying district is an R5, right? So they would have a 1.25 FAR. They're asking for 1.28.
Yeah.
So my big question is that 1.25 is pretty generous anyway. So I'm not clear as to why they're requiring additional, even though it's 0.03,
yeah,
whatever, but why?
Right, okay. But I think by maintaining a 5-foot side yard, they're going to get back to 1.25 or even something else. Okay, and they still have to justify a shallower rear yard. I don't know what amount of shallower, but they still have to justify it.
Yeah. And greenhouses, have to comply with DOB's regulations on greenhouses. So,
right.
Maybe council can correct me, but I think it's no foundation. It's got to be like a slab on grade.
That's what I thought.
There's like, you can't like brick it in. It's like glass all the way down. It's a greenhouse.
Right.
Meant for plants.
It's seasonal. It can
Seasonal.
have
It's seasonal.
HVAC,
Seasonal.
and so forth.
We like
Right,
that
well,
word.
this is clearly an extension on the dining room, but in addition to which, there's a serious foundation.
Yeah, so I think
So,
they need to look at that.
but I am curious about what it is that the DOB has the authority to grant with respect to that, because a greenhouse is a permitted obstruction in a required rear yard. If we reduce which is only supposed to be 6 feet, required rear yards are 30 feet, right? So how can they now use that permitted obstruction if the rear yard, for example, were reduced to 20 feet? I'm not actually sure the DOB has the authority to do that.
It would be contrary to the board's plans if we didn't authorize it.
Right. Well, a lot of the times we see on these notes, porch subject to DOB approval or garage subject to DOB approval, and we sort of stay out of it. This is a new one where they're extending the depth of the house. It's much different than the garage where it has a specific function. It always sits at the back, all that stuff. Okay. I think we're done.
Yep, that concludes the April 13th public review session for the Board of Standards and Appeals.
You look so official today.
Mike's off, Mike's
Yeah,
off.
that's the way they won't let me go civilian anymore.
What? Really?
How come you're limping?
it's my neighbor. It's just